Hello everyone, you get glitter stitches and I get glitter stitches, and today we have the knit cam, so the knit cam gets some glitter stitches too. Very good. All right, I'm the knitting fairy godmother. Today we have a question for Ask a Knitting Fairy Godmother. That's me. Today our question is about how to knit stranded color work with your right hand. So that if you are a thrower, if you knit American style with your working yarn in your right hand. That's what we're talking about today. So let's review a couple of terms real quick. So knitting with your right hand is called throwing, or the American style of knitting. That's knitting working yarn in your right hand. And then stranded color work is the generic umbrella term for when we knit in one row, two colors at the same time. These are traditional motifs that are found in things like Nordic sweaters, thrummed mittens, Fair Isle sweaters, things where there are floats or strands at the back of the knitting. And you can see that when we turn our knitting inside out, that we have floats in the back. Generally, this technique is knit in the round, so that's why we are working on double points today. Okay, let's talk a little bit about our swatch and what we're doing. So I have two colors, the white color on my right and the green color on my left. I'm knitting on double points so that I am working in the round. I cast on 10 stitches onto each needle, and this is just because I chose 10 stitches. It sounded like a nice round, even number. I knit a few rows in white to get started. I added one row of green, and then you can see here that I started my checkerboard pattern. I'm using worsted weight yarn, some stash yarn that I had. The double pointed needles I'm using today are a US 9 or 5.5 millimeter. So it's just practice. I'm using a simple 2x2, so 2 stitches by 2 rows alternating pattern. If you have a Fair Isle Colorwork motif, you can certainly copy that color chart in this and just practice that. I'm trying to focus on using my right hand to do the stranded color work. So let's get started. When we are doing stranded color work, it's important to keep the one color, whatever color you pick, the white yarn on the right and the green yarn on the left, and keep that consistent. This is called your yarn dominance. And if you're knitting a pattern, make sure that you write that down on your pattern, because you will inevitably forget and your work will reflect that little change. So for consistency's sake, write it down on your pattern and then follow. When we look at the knitting, so I can tell that it's time for me to change because I've done 2 rows, 1 row, 2 row in green. So my next stitch is going to be in white. So there's 2 ways that you can knit throwing, and the one way is where you pick up your strand every time, and that's what I'll show first. So I'm picking up my white yarn and knitting 2 stitches. Notice that I put my white yarn to the right to pick up my left yarn, the green yarn on the left, and now I'm going to knit that. And I'll put my green yarn on the left and pick up my white yarn on the right and knit it. Putting my white yarn down on the right and picking up the green yarn on the left here. trying to keep a nice even tension, gentle, putting the green yarn to the left, picking up the white yarn on the right. So I've knit my 10 stitches, picking up and putting down the yarn each time. The next way that it's possible to knit American style is over the index finger. So I don't have the guide. I'm going to show you how I knit with my index finger when I throw using 2 colors. So again, it's important when I'm putting the yarn over my finger, everyone has their own way of holding the yarn, but I'm going to maintain that order of the white on the right, or white to wrist, WW, and green over the index finger. And I'm on a new row, so I'm going to maintain that order. Here you can see a little more clearly that the white yarn is traveling over the green strand. So it's kind of making an X. And my next stitch is green, so I'm going to hold my yarn and throw. You know, it's good to see that sometimes it just takes a couple tries. There's my green. Next is white. Ooh, there we go. Green, white, and then the last color is green. So I've knit these 10 stitches with the yarn over my index finger. And you can see that the white is going to the right, the green is to the left, and there's no twist. The colors might overlap, but there's no twist. So let's look at the next step. I'm all cattywampus with my double points. Okay, because we're knitting in a stranded color work, there's a tendency for the floats on the inside to get tight, and that pulls your knitting in. So one way to make a longer float is to flip the inside out so that the floats are traveling around the outside of your circle. The outer circumference of your circle is larger than the inside. And that's just allowing your floats a little bit more space so that they don't get tight. Okay, so let's look at, let's try that. So now you can see that I've got the green on the left, the white on the right, and I'm bringing the white yarn traveling around the outside and trying to keep a nice, even, gentle tension. I have a tendency to knit tight. That's not what we want to do here. Now I put my white down, and the same thing with the green. I just gently bring the green across, and then I knit. Set the green down, pick the white up. I'm trying to match the floats to the gauge of the stitches so that nothing pulls in, and that just takes practice, which is why I have a practice piece. So here's the white. And for me, using a larger yarn, a standard worsted weight, and a little bit bigger needles helps my tension to even out. Let's look at what we've done. So you can see that I knit a couple rows in white. I knit one round in green, and then I started my checkerboard pattern. If we look on the inside at the floats, you can see the float pattern. Okay, so I hope that that is a broad explanation of how you can knit Fair Isle with one hand, your right hand throwing. If you have any questions, leave me a comment below and join me next week when I answer your knitting question. All right, see you next week.